Eternal Return is a combination of the MOBA genre and the Battle Royale genre. Recently, with the influx of players in Eternal Return 1.0, I've noticed that a ton of League of Legends players have been making the crossover to the community. Welcome! This guide will outline some of the key concepts of Eternal Return and compare them to the League of Legends that you know and love. Here's to hoping you understand the game. What's poppin' everyone, it's your boy Levi, and just so you know, I'm not entirely talking out of my ass here. I'm a consistent Mithril and Titan player in Eternal Return, and a Diamond 3 Peak X League of Legends ADC main. For starters, the combat is almost entirely similar to League of Legends. Each character has a passive, Q, W, E, and R for abilities, and a weapon skill and tactical skill that can be compared to the summoner spells from League of Legends. Depending on what weapon your character has, that will determine what weapon skill that you have. These are unique to weapon types and not characters, so every pistol character will have pistol skill. Every bat character will have bat skill. Pretty straightforward. Your tactical skill is the one that you choose, and it's more similar to some of their spells. Some of them you'll probably even recognize. Different from League of Legends is that your character levels up to 20 instead of 18. This is because you'll have to level up your passive as one of your abilities, unlike in League. All abilities and effects are pretty much the same as League. You have your skill shots, your targeted abilities, your basic attacks, etc, etc. But there are two CC types and one special type of damage ability that I want to talk about. The Eternal Return character Vanya has Sleep, similar to Lilia or Zoe from League of Legends, where you first go drowsy and then fall asleep in place. This works pretty much the exact same as League, where teammates can wake up the sleeping target, and Vanya will have bonus damage when attacking the sleeping target. Also, I would like to note that Vanya's W1 will not break the sleep. Only W2 will. This is unique to her. The second mechanic is Freeze. The Eternal Return character Elena has a freeze gauge that appears below her opponents when she attacks them. When this freeze gauge fills up, enemies will become frozen. Her and her teammates' next attack will do bonus damage to them and break the freeze. Important to note that enemies cannot break this freeze. So if you're third-partying a fight and someone gets frozen by an enemy at Elena, feel free to wail on them while they can't do anything. The last thing I want to mention is Lennox's ult. Lennox's ult is pretty unique in the sense that it only does damage if you're moving. You can completely counter this spell by standing still. I've seen so many new players bleed out to their death as they're running away from Lennox. Try to stand still when you can and you'll avoid taking damage from it. Next up, let's go into the damage types. In Eternal Return, we have attack power, amp, crit, and true damage as the main sources of damage. True damage is the same, so we'll ignore it for now. There's a few other types of damage, such as biotic damage, but that's not a beginner's guide friendly thing. It's in very few instances, so don't worry about it. Attack power is what's closest compared to AD or attack damage from League. Attack power increases your basic attack damage and spells for characters with AP scalings. Your ADC type characters and your AD casters will typically build attack power. Amp or skill amp is the equivalent of League's AP. Amp powers up spells and only spells with amp scalings. These are typically your mages. Crit is similar to League, where in Eternal Return it's a modifier for AP characters. Unless you decide to be a Karla main, leave crit for the ADC characters that use basic attacks rather than spells. Last thing you'll need to know about damage types is that there is only one type of base resistance in Eternal Return. All characters will have a base defense, and that's your resistance to all types of damage. We don't have magic resist like in League of Legends. Some items will have skill damage reduction or basic attack damage reduction on them, but all types of damage are calculated through defense, excluding true damage. This works the same way, and I promise this was one of the most confusing parts of Eternal Return, and it gets easier. Feel free to ask any questions around this in the comments. When you load into game, you want to get your base build online. This is your purple items, and this is called the looting and crafting phase of the game. This is basically your lane phase from League of Legends and should only last you to the start of night 1 at latest. Make sure to follow your route to get your items. Trading is a concept in League of Legends where you and your enemy try to lower each other's health to get an advantage in lane. In Eternal Return, this might be hitting someone with a spell as you walk by, but speed is still the most important thing in the early game. You'll want to take small trades with enemies as you walk by them, but don't get sucked into a full fight. It takes way too long to kill someone before you get your build online. It's not worth getting a kill on day 1 if it means that you're late getting your build by night 1 and you can just die to someone else who was quicker than you when objectives are coming up soon. This doesn't mean you shouldn't go for kills though. In League, you'll typically want to go for a kill when your character has a power spike or a significant item discrepancy in lane. The same goes for Eternal Return. If you've got most of your build online and you notice that someone is missing a considerable amount of items, it's not a bad play to go for that kill. Just keep in mind where the speed gates are nearby. You should also do this in night 1 once you complete your build if there's someone finishing in the same zone as you who doesn't have their build yet. Once it's night 1 and your team has their builds done, you're pretty much done with the laning phase. Your team will all turn into junglers and you'll want to travel around the map, picking up animal hunts and cooking food to prepare for objectives on day 2. In Eternal Return, there's no designated jungler position to get animals while your team fights. If you're a beginner, you should always try to group up at this point. It's risky to try and split farm. Save this for when you become more advanced at Eternal Return and you can recognize when an area is safe or unsafe. When objectives spawn on day 2 and from here on out, you'll want to optimize what's the play that makes you the strongest at all times. If you're familiar with the gold effective principle from high level League of Legends, then it's the same that goes here. Make the play that's the most guaranteed to make you stronger, whether it's fighting at an objective, clearing animals, or calling in a rare resource at the kiosk. Speaking of rare resources, these are what are used to upgrade your build. After you complete your base build, you'll want to look for rare resources to get transition items. These are gold items and you won't always find all the ones that you need each game. This is going to sound weird, but this is most closest to if you were to upgrade your items with an Ornn item, except this is way more common and you don't need a specific character on your team to do it. Rare resources can be found in spawns, competing in battle zones, purple boxes, and called in from kiosks, while transition items can be found in legendary boxes. Legendaries found in gold boxes will have adaptive damage on them, which is a damage type I didn't talk about earlier. I didn't want to confuse you at the time, but adaptive damage just means that legendary items will adapt to whatever your highest damage stat is. If you're building amp items, then your adaptive damage will be amp scaling. If you're building AP items, your adaptive damage will be AP scaling. Please note this is not the same for all legendary items, this is just ones labeled adaptive from legendary boxes. You'll also want to get rare resources from the androids. These are mini bosses throughout the game, kind of like Dragon, Rift Herald, and Baron. On night 2, there will be 2 alphas on the map. Slaying an alpha will produce a mithril when looted. On night 3, there will be 1 omega on the map. Slaying omega will produce a force core when looted. And finally, on night 4, Dr. Wickeline will roam the map. Think of this as a roaming Baron. Slaying her will produce a VF blood that can be looted, as well as 1 random rare resource between Tree of Life, Meteorite, Mithril, or the consumables. Your team will also gain a damage boost and a bleed effect on damaging abilities. This is one of the best objectives to grab in the game. The Wick buff effect will go to the team that last hits her health bar, but you still have to loot her body for the items. When final zones are established, 2 safe zones will appear. Your team will have to fight for the spot in the safe zone so that you don't lose your restricted timer and blow up. This is a pretty unique mechanic to Eternal Return that League doesn't really have. The closest thing I can compare this to is an inhibitor defense, considering it comes late in the game. You want to try and control the safe zone space so that you're the only team in it. When safe zones end, there will typically only be 2 teams left. They will fight for the final square to the death. This is your Nexus fight and will determine the winning team. When fighting in safe zones and final square, if you're the stronger team, you'll want to try and defend the square rather than being the ones trying to enter it. It's much easier to establish positioning from inside the square and fighting out of it than it is trying to fight into it. You can also set up traps and cameras to help you fight if you have the positional advantage. This is just a rough guide hoping to give you some help for the phases of Eternal Return if you're a League of Legends player. What I didn't go over is how every character from League compares to Eternal Return. If you're looking for a character suggestion, drop your main in the comments and I'll try and recommend some Eternal Return characters based on your League main. If you think you've got the hang of the core mechanics in Eternal Return, click or tap the screen now and you'll be taken to my Eternal Return Beginner's Guide for a full in-depth guide on how to play ER.